After many failed attempts, I'm finally reading A Court of Thorns and Roses. I feel like this series is everyone's Roman Empire. It has been on my TBR for a very, very long time. I read Throne of Glass about 4 or 5 years ago, so it's a bit of a stretch from when I'm starting the not connected series, is it? Because they're not connected. Well, kind of a little bit. I feel like they're distant cousins, and I'm just there waiting for the perfect time, even though that perfect time is never gonna come. It will be a spoiler reading vlog because I find that I can't find the right words to explain what I feel for a book if it's not through actually explaining what's happening in the story and how I feel about it. And it's a whole series, so it's difficult to talk about the second or the third book without spoiling much from the first. So if you haven't read the series and you want to read the series and you don't want to know anything about it, then don't watch this video, because I have watched many a kind of these kinds of videos and I basically knew like 80% of the plot going into ACOTAR. Imagine, right? You finish Onyx Storm, you feel like there's nothing to read. You can read ACOTAR for the first time again. I just can't be arsed. I don't know if it's like that I'm burned out or that it's just not grabbing my attention. There's a reason, okay, I tried to start it 4 times. And it's not because it's the greatest piece of literature around. I'm not saying it's bad, but I just can't be arsed to read. Also, the fact that she's like the youngest sister caring for the whole family because of a promise she made to her equally distant mum. Feyre, have some standards, please. And then there's her dad, which he gives me bad vibes. I think Nesta hates him for a reason, and I'm not gonna like that reason whenever it's revealed. Also, can we talk about the fact that she literally shot an arrow into a fairy? Okay, doesn't matter that it's a wolf. Okay, she shot the arrow. Okay, Katniss Everdeen, and then she killed him, skinned him, and sold his pelt at the market. If the fairies aren't scared of her now, they definitely will be later on, because what? Why is this book turning into a horror book? Like, in the woods, there's monsters. And when ACOTAR first came out, it was actually advertised as a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And I'm really seeing it now. But like, I'm kind of getting scared. Also, it's the fact that Tamlin is giving like, this child was left on my doorstep and I'm unwillingly taking care of it. I know they have like some sort of like romantic relationship further on in the book, but I know they're not endgame. And it's the way he says, do whatever you want with your time, just stay out of trouble. It's just giving that kind of energy, okay? Going back to the whole Beauty and the Beast retelling aspect, Tamlin even gave Feyre a whole library when she can't even read and write. I mean, there's always a time to learn. I'm sorry, but the second Rhysand appeared, Tamlin was nowhere to be seen in my brain. He gave me nothing. Rhysand just took over my senses. I was like, that's it. This is where the fun starts. But I think it's gonna be an enemies to lovers, really, because he came in and tried to kill Feyre. I mean, classical. But I'm trying to finish this book today and start the second one, which I forgot the name of. But I'm at the part where Tamlin sends her home, which like, I know she's gonna come back anyways. I know a lot about this book, and I know he's gonna betray her in some way, but I don't know how he's gonna do that. But I watched videos about it. That's how I know a lot of the stuff that I do know, but I don't know the ending. Grab yourself a coffee because we have a lot to discuss. I have finished the first book, ACOTAR, yesterday night. I started the second book, and spoiler alert, I stayed up till 4 a.m. reading it. I feel like I was starting to get into a book slump because I was burned out from reading Onyx Storm and the rest of the Empyrean series. But when I picked this series up, it might have prevented it from happening, which in my books is a win in of itself. You heard some of my thoughts already, however, there was more developments. Okay, here we go. Let me start with the fact that, again, this was a Beauty and the Beast retelling, so I should have kind of known about all the curse and all that stuff because it relates to Beauty and the Beast. But there is a reason why I never really liked that film for some reason. There was something about it that screamed to me more Stockholm Syndrome than romantic. I mean, in this one there's obviously a twist because Rysand I'm gonna get into that later. So because this book was heavily inspired by Beauty and the Beast, I inherently would not love it because I don't like that story. The pacing was a bit weird because we got this like information dumping about the history and the stories at some point in the book, which could have been spread apart throughout the book. Now on the romance, Tamlin I didn't like from the very start, and I think what he did for Feyre's family was actually to get her to fall in love with him as opposed to being out of his own kindness, because we see things like the tithe and all of that. I think that mostly happens in the second book, but there's things about him and his traditions of his court that I think he should have just changed if he wasn't a bad dude. With ease that Tamlin spun all the lies. Like, we know now that the blight was actually Amarantha and not this sickness, but with the way he easily lied to her just rubs me the wrong way. But at the same time, I feel like we really needed him in book 1 because they're together, right? But then Rysand comes in and there's like that little added bit of tension that Tamlin is still in the picture. I wouldn't have it any other way, to be honest. I feel like Tamlin, though I don't like him, serves his purpose. Feyre also had some bite to her, which I really liked. Some of her one-liners, so good. When she says to Tamlin, he also said that you like being brushed, and if I'm a clever girl, I might train you with treats. And this is me writing as a note on my Kindle. I fuck with Feyre. Like, she's no Aelin, but she's growing on me. Yeah, so she says he'd offered me paints and space and time to practice. He'd shown me pools of starlight. He'd saved my life like some kind of feral knight in the legend, and I'd gulped it down like the fairy wine. I was no better than those zealot children of the blessed, which I think is quite actually accurate. He showered her with this love, attention, love bombing, dare I say. It all screamed to me like it was manipulation to get her to fall in love with him, because even if you had good intentions and you had this curse thrown on you that you have to have someone fall in love, obviously you would maybe even subconsciously do things to make them fall in love with you, even if you don't necessarily love them back or love them back in the way you should. Oh, and Tamlin wrote her a poem and I said, I'm sorry, but this is the worst poem I've ever read. And yeah, I mean, you've heard already about my love for Rysand when he swoops in to save her. I mean, he saved her life countless times in this book, and I'm sure the next, well, I've read the next. Let me say something actually though. In the next book, I feel like he leaves her a little bit to her own devices, but I mean, he does save her life countless times. And I said, these are all like the notes that I leave in my Kindle, if you are wondering. If scary, then why hot? So when Tamlin says, you're exactly as I dreamed you'd be too, I feel like, again, that's him liking the idea of her and how she'll serve the purpose in breaking his curse, but actually not in love with her. The swearing is so funny to me. The way she says, a cauldron, boil and fry me, or whoever says that, that's so goofy. That is so goofy. And I find it so funny that when Tamlin says, you know, I love you, and she says, I should say it, I should say those words, but they got stuck in my throat because of what he had to face, because blah blah blah, because like, you're just making excuses. You don't love him. It's that simple. I feel like she definitely just feels gratitude towards him, and because of that she feels like she loves him for all that he has done. Again, manipulation, but she doesn't actually love him for him. And when Nesta went after her, oh my days. I don't hate Nesta. Yes, I think she's rude, but I don't hate her. I'm just accepting that she is just one of those people. Okay, here's a little shot in the dark. I feel like Nesta says rude things to people because she's scared of people seeing her soft, and part of that is pride as well. I feel like she's proud. She doesn't want to be seen as weak, which I understand, as awful as it may seem. And Feyre says, whether my father would have come after me, he didn't possess the courage, the anger. If anything, he would have hired someone to do it for him, but Nesta had gone with that mercenary. My hateful, cold sister had been willing to brave Prithian to rescue me. And that's precisely why I love her, because under all that steel in her heart, she has love in her own way. I hate the way Alice was really angry at Feyre for not realizing that Tamlin has a curse. Like, how was she supposed to know? Especially that they literally lied to her about the sickness. All she had to go off of is that there's an evil she somewhere. Nothing else. Not unless Alice told the whole flipping history of their universe Then she was like, oh, now I know that there's a curse. And Alice says, we were too blind to see Tamlin's curse. How do you expect to face Amarantha? You'll make things worse. I mean, she said like more angry things, but that's one of the things I highlighted. Like, she kept going on and on and on, being angry at Feyre. Seriously. So Rizan saves her the first time they ever meet, when they're at the, I think Calanmai it's called, the fire party, and he pretends to know her so that the creatures on her would scurry off. And then the second time he saves her, when he gives Amarantha the name of the wrong girl. I feel like because he knows of this curse again, there's this whole plan: save Feyre, save Tamlin, save myself. Like, I can understand when people say, oh well, Rizan did terrible things to her. He also saved her life countless times, and sometimes if it gets too far, like he got with the wine, I'm like, whoa, okay, let's reel it back in. I can understand that, I can see it, but he had his own reasons at the end of the day, and he bet on her. It's book 1, and with all he's doing when they barely know each other, oh my days, I love him. Amarantha says, yes, I'd say almost my entire court bet on you dying within the first minute. Some said you'd last 5, and just one person said you would win. And I have to talk about like Under the Mountain, because I know it was really traumatic for Feyre. The way Tamlin behaved, I know he's like under some sort of constriction because of the situation that they're in, but boy, if you truly really loved her and you wouldn't see her as just a tool to get your own freedom, you would have done something for her. Even then, like when he had that free time when he went to make out with her, he could have at least said, I could try get you out, I could try something, tell me what you need, I will do anything for you, it's your choice. If you want to stay and fight for me, I can respect that, but don't feel like you have to. That's all you had to say. And then for the rest of the time, for 3 whole months, okay, she was there for 3 months, and he did not even lift a single finger besides that one time that he made out with her. He could have somehow found a way. And the way Rizan, okay, so before he actually took her to the party and made her drink that wine, he did say, but I need an escort for the party, and when I thought of you squatting in that cell all night alone, in a way, he also like helped her escape her cell. This whole book, like from the middle to the end, is just me blushing over Rizan. And the way she says to him, you're a disgusting bastard. And he says, I'll have to ask Tamlin if this kind of flattery won his heart. The way he came to her when he was sad, and Feyre asked, why are you telling me this? Because he explained all his sadness and stuff. He says, because I'm tired and lonely and you're the only person I can talk to without putting myself at risk. He already feels comfortable with her, and I think even though she's in a prison cell, she's a human, and he still treats her and sees her as a person. Even Tamlin gave me the vibes that he felt like he was superior to her. And obviously when he says goodbye for now and he bows at the waist, if that doesn't show respect, I don't know what does. He realizes that obviously Feyre is his mate, which I feel like completely changes the perspective. When you go into book 2, he still gives her choices, like whether she wants to be with Tamlin or stay in the night court after Tamlin traps her and then he whisks her away. Just a little bit on the second book before I forget, I just noticed how whenever it came to like other creatures, like the bone carver, I mean, I'm quite far into book 2, is the way the bone carver, the weaver, Rizan left her to deal with them. Like, he was maybe a little bit scared of her life, but he kind of like left her to just deal with it on her own. But whenever it came to Tamlin, Rizan was like scared for her life. Wrapping up book 1, romance, I felt like it was a nice progression from Tamlin to Rizan. What else could you want? After that, I was like, yeah, I'm locked in, because in book 2, like at the 50% mark, they still haven't done anything or kissed or anything or admitted their feelings, even though Rizan said he's attracted to her, but we'll get onto that later. I would say one thing, leading from book 1 to book 2, the wedding was very unexpected. I thought I missed a book or I missed something or some pages, because when we went to book 2, it already says, oh, I'm getting married with Tamlin, but we didn't see their proposal, we didn't see any of that plot. I felt like the pacing was weird for me. I think the pacing was necessary, but you just have to get through book 1. Obviously, you had to believe that she was actually in love with Tamlin, and for that they need time. My overall thoughts is that I liked it. It's like a 3.5, because my 4 stars, not as good as a 5-star, but my 4-star is like, oh, this book was good. Which I'm not getting from this book. It's not like a 3 where usually my 3s are like It's like a 3.5. It's in the middle. It has potential, and that's where I'm going with this. Then we got into the second book. Plot really progressed. We've got introduced to a whole new storyline. Obviously in book 1 we've been introduced to Amarantha and then the king of, was it Hybern, and we knew that was going to be a big threat, but it really came into fruition. Tamlin, because his curse was broken, he's like, all right, we need to get back to duties, back to work. Enough of this romance nonsense. How do I put it lightly? Tamlin used her just as like a stress reliever. I don't know how to say her name, but she's like the priestess that is first responsible for the Feyre and Tamlin's wedding. And she says, Tamlin is a high lord. You will be his wife. There are traditions and expectations you must uphold. We must uphold in order to present a solid front that is healed from Amarantha and willing to destroy any foes who try to take what is ours again. That screams to me, you're gonna be his wife because it's a duty thing. I'm realizing so much now, like reading it back, because that is disgusting. I love the way Rhysand came when Feyre needed it most. And now I'm wondering, did he come because he knew he would interrupt their wedding? Or did he come because she called, or both? And then he says, hello, Feyre darling. There were so many quotes in book 2 that underlined between her and Rhysand. He taught her to write. Fair enough, it was again for his own reasons. But his own reasons also serve her. Like, I could go on and on, but he very clearly cares for her and sees her as a person, which Tamlin does not. We really led up to the moment where Feyre broke down. You could really see things eating away at her. To make it bearable, I'm gonna change my voice just so you know who's speaking. Take me home. Okay. Take me home. The color suits you. Do you want me to say please? Is that it? I want you to talk to me like a person. Start with good morning and let's see where it gets us. I'm not gonna make that. Yeah, I'm not gonna go on and saying how much Rhysand, what he does for Feyre, how he cares for her, what quotes he says, because we're literally gonna be here all day and night. Listen. When Feyre went to the Weaver, it gave me like childhood bedtime story vibes, okay? It's an old cottage that's very welcoming, inviting, and inside it's like there's like a witch, you know? I was terrified. I'm not even gonna lie, I skimmed part of that scene because I have a very vivid imagination and I do not want flashbacks of that when I'm trying to sleep. So no thank you. I just know that she escaped through the chimney. Oh my god, the tight spaces had the witch be like under her. Terrifying. The music stopped and the viewer was like, who's in my house? Oh my god. But all of this I feel like is very interesting. It's much more interesting than the first one because we're doing a lot more things. We're going to see more places. The plot is really picking up, and again, I'm like 50% or 60% of the way through, so I'm sure it's gonna pick up some more. But I'm really excited to see where book 3 goes. I mean, I'm sure they're not gonna defeat the king in one book. The way he's waging his war is not very like brute force. He's doing it with strategy, which I find really interesting. Now I'm at the part where they're coming back from the summer court and all that jealousy. Oh my days, I was living for it. It had me in a chokehold because the romance and the plot is 50-50. They kind of drive each other. I'll update if anything interesting happens because when I finish this book today, get started on the third one tomorrow, read the whole weekend, and then hopefully be done by Monday. This is such a stupid thing, but like, why do they keep saying peoples? People, not peoples. This is what I mean when I say this book is more led by the romance than the plot, which, I mean, that's not news, but I just wish it was a little bit more developed because it seems like everything is happening or coming up out of convenience. So right now, to prove to the queens that Rhys is good, has good intentions for peace and whatnot, instead of like showing them in some creative way, there happens to be a magical orb. I mean, it's just like a tiny complaint. But see, then we go into the romance. So they're going under the mountain, obviously, to get that orb. Rhysand says, the role you will have to play is not a pleasant one. And she says, I trust you. I've got such a migraine, but we're just gonna persevere. I'm slowly getting through book 3, but before I finish everything, I just wanted to give like a quick update. I collected all my thoughts on my computer so that I don't miss anything. The thing with this series is when you hear people talk about it, they either love it or hate it, but me personally, I think I'm just disappointed. I believe Throne of Glass was published first, but A Court of Thorns and Roses just reads more like a debut series, and Throne of Glass is so much more developed as far as I remember. I get that there was a lot of thought put into like the history and the backgrounds of all these characters and the series, but making characters recount it in every single conversation is not the way to explain it to the reader. And I've said it once, I'd say it again, the info dumping is just so tiring, annoying, and less memorable because of how often it happens. Every time a character opens their mouth, I'm like, oh, here we go again. They go on this long monologue where it feels like it's not even the character speaking, but the author telling us the whole Wikipedia rundown of the history. There are so many more creative ways to explain what happened instead of info dumping, like actually showing it. And it's so unbearable to read because it really reads more like a textbook than a book. It just pulls me out of the story. I also understand why people only care about the romance in this book, because that's truly the most interesting part of this whole series. And that was only until the end of book 2, where Rhys and Feyre got together and the games ended, and that was really what kept me up until 4 a.m. Me personally, I think that without the romance, the plot would not hold on its own. It's just not interesting enough. With the magic system as well, I noticed there's no burnout, there's no limits, there's not really any stakes. It makes the stakes slower than they already are. We know that the war is coming and that Hyben will break down the wall and then go into human territory and kill them and whatever, but what are the stakes against Feyre? There is not really a great risk to them personally, which makes me think, why should I care? At the end of book 2, when they encountered Hyben, he wasn't even that scary. Now I'm on the 3rd book and I'm just trudging through because nothing's really happening. I liked Feyre's cunning and scheming in the beginning in the Spring Court, but then she got back and nothing is really holding my attention. I wish we had more cunning ways and interesting ways to go about stopping the war, but it feels like we're going through everything in slow motion. Most of the time we're just waiting, like waiting for an answer, like from the Queens in book 2, or for Asriel to complete his surveillance of some sort. And I know that time is dedicated to expanding the relationships, but relationships grow the most in the midst of action. It's just poor pacing, and I would have forgiven it more if the romance was slower and that's what was keeping me in the book. But now that that's gone, the plot is just not enough. I want to see the characters really struggling to go against the villain over and over again while coming up with new ways to stop him, and not sitting there and waiting for some magical object or someone to come to their rescue. If I read this when I was younger, I feel like, yes, I would have liked it more because these things wouldn't have really bothered me, but now it really does, and it's almost unreadable. Even if I'm just reading for the vibes and there are no high standards, there's nothing really that captures my attention. I feel like the timeline and everything feels more like a first draft. I think I'm just not invested in the story, and I have to be to finish it. If I wasn't filming myself reading it and trying to get a video out, I would have taken months to finish this book. I know it sounds harsh, but I have to tell my truth, and that is the truth. I did enjoy the book 2 a lot, like I said, but the rest, I'm still interested, I guess, to see where it goes, but not at the level where I don't want to stop reading it. Anyways, I'm gonna go back to reading book 3, and if anything happens or I have any thoughts, I'll let you know, unless I finish book 3, and then we move on to the novella. At last, something different. I've been literally listening to the audiobook for A Court of Wings and Fury and crocheting a blanket. The audiobook made it so much more bearable to listen to, or well, hear the story out. And the reunion with all like the Bryaxes, Bonecarver, the Weaver coming in to fight for them, the Lost Queen, Lucian, and Feyre's dad. I was so convinced that he was going to betray them and actually work with Hyben, but instead he fought for them. Surprise of the century, almost teared up. But then the rest was all like just melodramatics, let's be real. But I can appreciate it for what it is. I mean, they won. Everything's all good now. I don't know what's gonna happen in the Court of Silver Flames though. I've still got like 3 or 4 chapters to listen to until I actually finish it. But I don't know what's gonna happen in like A Court of Frost and Starlight and A Court of Silver Flames. Like, what is going to happen? God knows. I don't know what the next evil is going to be. And with Reese dying, I mean, I knew that he was going to make it because the bone carver literally took the form of Feyre's and Rhysand's son. He wouldn't have done that if the son was not to be in existence, which means that Rhys would have had to be alive to do the tango with Feyre again and somehow be pregnant. Well, not him, but Feyre. I've now finished the whole series. I'm gonna start off by saying I don't get how people say that this series is like a starter series, because if I was not already into reading, a couple of these books would have just bore me to death. And not only that, but because of the info dumping in between people's conversations, I mean, there's like paragraphs and paragraphs of histories like her Wikipedia. So now I'm thinking, how do people actually get their heads around the story? Because it's just everything thrown at you all at once. I think the easiest way to do this is to go through the first 3 books, then talk about the novella, and then talk about the last book, because the first 3 books are obviously about focusing on Feyre, and then the novella is kind of a little bit of everyone, and then the last one is on Nesta. The first 3 books, from the first book to the second, I loved how the romance grew. I loved Rhysand and Feyre. I loved the angst, everything about it. I loved it. I think Tamlin was even necessary for the first book because it kind of paved the way for a little bit of the drama later on. So the first one was 3 stars. It was just an introductory first book. The second one, very much focused on the romance, which isn't a bad thing. Like, you go into the series thinking it's a romantasy, but very heavy on the romance. But then you go into the third one, we kind of just became stale. There was nothing really to it. The romance is definitely not the main plot. It's the war. It's going from one monster to the other, trying to work out the alliances. And I think the only interesting parts was the bone carver, the mirror that I think, what was it called? The Oboros. I wish that part we also got to see Feyre looking at the mirror, looking at herself, going through like hours of basically torturing herself until she accepted herself. That mirror scene would have been the one that showed that she finally accepted herself, but we kind of just skipped over that. I literally, this is for Court of Silver Flames, but I kind of just like printed out character art. It was kind of like easier to do like a mugshot of each of them and my opinions. So for Feyre, take a shot every time she stuck out her tongue at someone. I don't know how a 500-year-old plus man go for a girl that sticks out her tongue at him. I hate it so much. For Elaine, I said Feyre is vanilla, but Elaine doesn't have any flavor. Her only personality is being nice, kind of ignorant, and that she loves gardening. That was just her whole character, which I know it's not about her. You could have done a little bit more. With the amount of pages you spend writing these books, you could have put at least a little bit of interesting parts about Elaine. I'm going to talk about Nesta in her own book, but even throughout the first 3 books, I didn't hate her. The plot, first and second, I mean, second, it wasn't the main focus, which I kind of understand. The first one, we were setting everything up. The third one was really the chance to make it really out there, and I think it just wasn't done. I wasn't on the edge of my seat. I think the King of Highburn, he could have been a lot more menacing, which I know he's described to be, and all the things that he does. He just doesn't stick out to me as a very good villain. I mean, Amarantha was way more scarier than him, and that was in the first book. We're on the third one now, and you can't make a villain scarier than her. I mean, that's just my opinion. I think that's subjective, but I don't think he was a good villain. And you'll see from this book, from the third one, how it kind of just went downhill from there with the villains of the stories. So for the third one, honestly, I settled on a 3-star, but because it did bore me a little bit. I mean, the only interesting part of it was the bone carver, Bryaxis, and the Weaver, and I liked the reunion at the end. There's some things that I absolutely love in books, and that will skyrocket the rating. For this one, there was just one thing that I loved, and that was when everyone reunited to help. And even Feyre's dad, he just like came out of nowhere, which I think was a bit of the point. Like, it was a little bit foreshadowed that he was working on something, but it just came out of left field. But I just changed it to a 2. It was a bit boring. I had to listen to the audiobook to continue through it, otherwise I would not have finished it. It would have been taking me months to finish it. Then we go on to the novella. Everyone's in agreement that it was just like a little break for Christmas basically, or winter solstice. So it was like sweet and cute to see, but besides that, I mean, it was not anything special. But one character I will touch on is Amran. Oh my god, there's something about me and loving these females that are kind of like rude, not the good guys. I loved her. She gave a little bit of spice of personality, which is what stuck out to me. The last book, I'm gonna start with Nesta, because everyone goes into this book saying, oh my god, I hate Nesta, how can I read this book? I don't know how to say this lightly. You do not have to like a character to read the book, because she was unlikable and rude and whatever, but that was a starting point, which means that there was a lot of time to see her grow, which is something that I love. Have like a change of character, even to see like Eris becoming like somewhat of a good guy. So I wrote some of the thoughts down for the book as I was reading it. I'm gonna touch on those. Again, I like the fact that Nesta is an unlikable character because there's more room to see her grow. And her father focused on money instead of a cure for her mum, which ultimately led to her death. Of course, she's gonna hate him. I know the excuse for her not helping Feyre go hunt and letting her as a 14-year-old go out to the forest to hunt for food was because she wanted to see if their dad does anything to kind of help them, which isn't like a strong excuse, but I kind of get that. I said I love that she got other women to come to training, and that took a bit of time for that to happen. She really was thinking about like other people forming these friendships. I mean, these women were in the library where she got assigned to work at, and they went through a lot of horrible things. So to come out of the world into the world and kind of overcome their fear, that was obviously going to take time, so I appreciated that. And Feyre sounded so much more annoying in Nesta's POV. It's like a little sibling. And the most disappointing thing in this entire book was that the queen was the most anticlimactic villain ever. She just wanted to be turned young again, and Nesta destroyed her so easily. Yeah, the villains just progressively got worse and worse. It said on my Kindle I was 1 hour away from finishing it, and I thought to myself, we're not even at the war yet that they were talking about. There's nothing really like going on or setting up for it, like there's nothing. And then it kind of just ended in like a couple of pages. It was done and they won. That's why the plot was unnecessary, the romance was lackluster, and I'm gonna get onto that in a couple seconds. The Valkyries and Nesta's growth was the highlights for me of the entire book. And the message was a little bit on the nose, how Nesta said, you know, we need to accept ourselves, blah blah blah, not be scared. It was very on the nose, but I mean, at least there was some sort of point. So more on Nesta, I loved watching her grow. I never even hated her, like I said. I love that her growth was literally quantifiable as well, like her trying to get over the 10,000 steps. I love those parts. And Gwyn, I literally said, Gwyn is my wife. I loved every time she was on the page. Focusing on her more would have even added more to the book. And Rhysand in this book was also just so unbearable. Like, he became so stale after the second book, through to the third, fourth, and there was something really to him. And the fact that he worried that Nesta would hurt Feyre and her baby was honestly insulting, because like, I guess she might be rude sometimes, but on the one hand, isn't that the same for all siblings? And two, she's not a monster. Like, she means well at some points. Like, she wouldn't just hurt her sister, and there was no really indication that she ever would, just that she was a bit mean-spirited sometimes. Azriel, I mean, I loved his moments of wit, but like, I don't have exactly an opinion of him. I would need to see more, and I know the next book is either going to be on him or someone else, so maybe then I'll get a better idea. And then comes the male love interest, Cassian. He lost his personality in the fifth book. I feel like he was so witty before. He was kind of like the comic relief next to Lucien, and then when it came to Nesta, I kind of he became so boring. There was nothing really to him, and I didn't feel the chemistry at all. That's why the romance was like lackluster, because I didn't feel any chemistry, any tension, anything. It was just like they started sleeping together, and then at the end they said I love you to each other, because I feel like you would expect that to happen, but did they actually? They might care for each other, they might feel attracted to each other, but do they love each other? I just didn't believe in their romance at all. She had more chemistry with Eris on the dance floor than she had with Cassian the entire book. All in all, the moments in these books outweighed the negatives. That's why I kind of would forgive the flaws and the villain being anticlimactic. I mean, I loved the girl group, I loved Nesta's growth, and that kind of overpowered all the negatives that I've had. But is this like the most amazing book ever? No. Again, I know that people say this is a romantasy, is going to focus on the romance, so don't expect the plot to be the best. Okay, but after the second book, Feyre and Rhys already got together, so what was left was the war and the plot. And if it was a little bit more developed, maybe the book a little bit shorter to kind of condense the unnecessary scenes, then it was intended to be focused on the plot, but the plot was just not good enough. And I'm already forgetting everything that happened because it was just not memorable at all. So as much as I love some of the things that happened, is it the best be-all series? It's not, which kind of disappoints me, because I really thought that everyone hypes this series up, and I know that it might not be the best, but it would have been like interesting, which at points it was, but most of it was not. So I was just left disappointed. I wanted it to be over and done with, and I barely got through the third and the fourth. That would have put me in a book slump. Thank God, even though the last book is the longest, I think it went pretty fast because I enjoyed some of the things. So I gave it 4 stars because I think the good things in this book deserve that 4 stars. And if everything else was more developed, it would have been a 5. It was just so close. I think it was up there, but it fell down. I definitely don't hate this series. And one other thing was that Nesta's magic was, again, not developed enough. Like, I didn't understand how her power actually worked. Oh, and the amount of times they said like horse to like. If you get any tattoo from the series, get the one that says like horse to like, because it's said like 10,000 times. That would be the perfect quote to summarize this entire series. Like horse to like. I don't hate this series, but I really don't love it. I'm gonna be so honest. It could have been good. It was so close to being good, but then it just disappointed me. But that's everything. I hope if you love this series a lot, don't hate me, but I'm just saying the truth. I can't lie. Thank you for watching, and now I'm just gonna go read. I feel like I'm free to read anything now, and then there's so much books to read, and this series drained some of the life in me, so I need to get my soul back.